This episode is brought to you by Alphasense, the AI platform behind the world's biggest investment decisions. The right financial intelligence platform can make or break your quarter. Alphasense is the #1 rated financial research solution by G2. With AI search technology and a library of premium content, you can stay ahead of key macroeconomic trends and accelerate your investment research efforts. AI capabilities like smart synonyms and sentiment analysis provide even deeper industry and company analysis. Alphasense gives you the tools you need to provide better analysis for you and your clients. As yet another value podcast listener, visit alpha-sense.com/FS today to beat FOMO and move faster than the market. That's alpha-sense.com/FS. All right. Hello and welcome to yet another value podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Walker. If you like this podcast, it would mean a lot if you could rate, subscribe, review wherever you're watching or listening to it. You know, it would mean a lot because I'm on paternity leave, but I just had to bring you guys the content while I'm gone. I have a great guest. I'm super excited about it. Today I have Michael Cohen. Mike is from MDC Event Driven Legal. Mike, how's it going?
Going good, and it's a pleasure to be here. I watch your podcast, and now for the first time I'm on it, and I'm thrilled.
Well, look, we've been talking I'll get there. Let me do a disclaimer first. Disclaimer to remind everyone that nothing on this podcast is investing advice. That's always true, particularly true today. We're going to be talking about a legal situation where I know both Mike and I are certainly not lawyers, and it also has become a rapidly somewhat distressed legal situation. So people should just keep in mind, heightened risk, legal situation, not lawyers, not financial advice, not legal advice, all of that. Mike, let me just do a little quick pitch for you. The reason we're doing this podcast, the reason I'm taking a break from paternity leave is longtime listeners will know I am super interested in the JetBlue Spirit merger. I had Lionel Hutz on about a month ago to go through the overview of the trial, the case, and everything. So people can listen to that for a refresher on the course. But the reason I'm excited to have you on is this trial, it is not getting live streamed, right? And unless you're at the law firm, there was a little bit of a hullabaloo. If you work for one of the law firms, you can get a stream. But if you don't, the only way to get access to this trial is to go park your butt in person and listen to the court case. So, there aren't many people doing that. And you run MDC Event Driven Legal. Like, this is what you do. I'm a happy subscriber. I've been subscribed for over a year at this point. Like, you literally go to trials, listen to them, and write them up. So not only do you have, in this case, unique knowledge that not a lot of people have, this is kind of the core of what you do. Go and listen to trials. So I'm really excited to go through the JetBlue Spirit trial. We're at about day 10, about halfway through. I'm really excited to go through how it's been going so far. Does all of that make sense, or anything you want to add there?
It all makes sense, except we're only on day 8, so we're not quite halfway through, but it's a little bit before the normal halftime show.
I was rounding a little bit. I hear you, but and some of the fireworks are yet to come. I think next week is more normal witnesses, and then expert witnesses probably back half of next week or starting the week after that. But I thought it was good to call it roughly a halftime report. So let's just say stop right there. Your job has been going to trials and kind of listening to them, reporting, reading the room, high level, roughly halftime. What's your read of the room? How do you think the case is going for both sides?
I'm sure and I get these questions all the time. Everybody wants to know who's winning. I really think it's premature at this point to know who's winning. I think that the economic experts are probably going to be the ones that probably the most important testimony. I think the single most important thing is going to be market definition. And we really don't yet have a full read on, each side is going different extremes, right? The government wants a single route. JetBlue wants the whole United States. Realistically, we're probably going to end up at metro markets or somewhere where there's more of a natural barrier for substitution. But we're really not going to have a read on what the judge is thinking until we get his questions and things when we get into those economic experts. The way the trial's tracking, we'll have fact experts likely done next week for the government. Then the economic experts for the government will be probably the following, or all experts will be the following week. Right before Thanksgiving, the government should rest its case, and then we're into JetBlue's case. We've had a little bit of a difference in the beginning because both sides have been doing direct with some of the witnesses, and it was ironic because we just recently had a clarification of this in that the judge said, I keep my mouth shut when there was an objection. And he objected, he granted the objection of the government, and they thought that was unfair because they thought they could enter it in on direct. And so now it looks like they'll have to call back experts and not be kind of doing the side-by-side direct that we've been doing. It's interesting that the government never objected to this point before them going beyond the scope. And all of a sudden, it seems like it's going to be a little different trial going forward than we've had.
No, so this is actually this happened during the John Kirby testimony. This is John Kirby is Spirit's head of revenue management. I think we'll talk more about, that was the most interesting testimony to me, but let me ask about that part because it was on my list of things, right? As you said, like the way witnesses normally work, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've been to way more of these. I'm not a lawyer. If it's you versus me, I call up my witness, I get a direct on them, then you get a cross-examination, and then I have I believe a follow-up. And what happens is my direct is the overarching case. Your cross-examination is kind of supposed to rebut what I did, but you're not supposed to introduce new evidence. And then my kind of rebuttal to yours is just like very small clarifications, right? So it narrows down. The way it had been going is the government would call a witness, and JetBlue was basically introducing their case in their cross-examination of the witness. And the judge was allowing it until with John Kirby, the government objected to something and JetBlue said, the judge sustained it. And JetBlue said, hey, you've been letting us do this the whole time. And the judge, as you said, yeah, that's because the government never objected. And I was really interested in that because I was wondering, did the government make a tactical mistake? It kind of threw me back to poker, where poker was really popular on TV for a while. And when you were watching, and if you knew someone had a great hand and they kind of set the trap for someone and you were watching the other person fall into the trap, I wonder if the judge, who is known as a guy who loves trials, I wonder if he was up there kind of feeling like the government didn't realize they were in a trap, that all they had to do was object and they could stop this, but they were giving JetBlue a huge tactical advantage. Or there's a lot of other reads. I'll pause there. What do you think about that?
Okay. Well, the objection was he had worked for AirTran, and so there was an AirTran Southwest merger, and they wanted to get into, did the DOJ, want to stop that merger, and that's where the objection came in, and he sustained it, and they thought that they could go forward because that would be consistent with the kind of thing they'd be doing on direct, and the parties. It seemed like JetBlue thought he had an agreement with the government that he can do his direct, and then with each witness, and the government never objected to it till that point. And going forward, it's he was on your recall list. It's just that you can recall him at any time. So it does look like at any point they can recall witnesses should they choose to, if they feel they didn't get enough in on the direct. And there was no objections beyond the scope. And you're absolutely correct. You're supposed to, on cross, rebut and only rebut what was on direct, not go beyond the scope. And then there's a redirect and a recross, and it can keep going on, but it gets narrower and narrower until nobody has anything left to say, and then they're done with that witness. I do look at it as a little bit of a tactical mistake because they could have objected.
Can you just clarify for who?
Yeah, for the DOJ, because they could have objected at any point to all the stuff that was beyond the scope, and they didn't. So that's all in the record, but now it looks like they can also recall any witness should they feel they need to fill that out. So I can't recall ever seeing a trial where they weren't on the same page like that. I didn't see an agreement in the docket. The DOJ thought there was a verbal agreement with the government, which there must have been, because otherwise it wouldn't have gone that way. But since there's no formal agreement, the government, granted the objection, and the high level to the government is that they can object beyond the scope at any point this time.
So that's interesting. It does seem to me, because one of the things I had been surprised by was how much of the JetBlue defense against the DOJ suit has already been introduced so far. And I guess what you're saying is, look, they could have brought it up when JetBlue started calling witnesses and started presenting their case. So it's not like it's a huge loss for the government or for the DOJ, but at the same time, they've given the DOJ, they've given JetBlue a lot of extra time for their witnesses, a lot of extra time. And they've already introduced a lot of the JetBlue defense into the record, which I think is very interesting.
Now, the time is actually not going to hurt the DOJ because the judge is taking very detailed time, and your cross is, your DOJ's time, and the direct is, sorry, I got that backward. The cross is the defendant's time, and the direct so far has been the government's time. Mm-hmm. And at the end of every day, he's been saying how many days and hours each side has. So this is not just, this is the DOJ's case, this is their day. Yep. He's keeping it very detailed. So there won't be any punishment to the DOJ there, but they have the ability of getting things in early, which they already did. And then they also now have the ability of getting things on their case, which can then only be crossed by the government. So
Go ahead. Go ahead.
One thing I'd like to add is, so the effect so far has really been like watching two different cases. Normally there's a fact pattern, and then, they're presenting their fact pattern, and then the other side cross-examines them, and then the case switches and the other side presents their fact pattern and it's crossed. And I've really been watching, it's like two cases passing in the night, and they're completely different cases. JetBlue is, giving a case. It's a very fluid industry. Things change all the time. Routes can change one day to the next. Competition can come in. Small startups can fill the ULCC space that they'll exit. And the DOJ's case is, a single route hurting a single passenger is, you got to stop this.
It has been weird reading the summaries, because I'm with you. Normally, I'm used to trials, and again, no legal expert here, but I'm used to trials where someone presents and then someone tries to rebut them on the cross, and it kind of flows. And in this case, it'll be like, Spirit, like, isn't it true that in Des Moines to Baton Rouge, like, you guys are super competitive with JetBlue? And the guy will be like, yes. And then JetBlue will come and be like, hey, isn't it true that nationwide, like, your loyalty program is nothing compared to Delta? And it's just going back and forth. Let me see. I want to ask more about Kirby. Before I do, I think there were two big things that have every ARB I've talked to, every person has really been talking about. The first one is, I believe it's when the JetBlue CEO is talking, the judge interjects and he says something, I think he says like 4 times, don't read anything into this. Media members who are listening, don't read anything into this. No one read anything into this. So of course we all instantly read as much as we can into it. But he asks, hey, JetBlue CEO, and it was the JetBlue CEO. Yeah, I'm sure you know where I'm going. It was the JetBlue CEO. Yeah. So
I'm double check. I know where you're talking about. I'm not remembering 100% if it was in the testimony or not.
You check, and I'll do it for the listeners because I think you know where I'm going. But he says, hey, JetBlue CEO or whoever the witness is, if I listen to this case and I say, hey, the government makes some great points. This merger as is would be anti-competitive, but I think if JetBlue did X, Y, and Z, I could write into a ruling. Could I write into a ruling that, hey, JetBlue, the merger is anti-competitive as is, but if you do X, Y, and Z, it will be pro-competitive or it will not be anti-competitive, and the merger can go through. And he asked that question. And so I want to ask you 2 things on that. A, what was your feel when he asked that? Like, he said, don't read anything into it. Please read into it. And B, I've seen everybody report on the question, but I haven't seen anyone report on kind of the follow-up to the question. I haven't seen the answer reported. I didn't see how it went over in the courtroom with the witnesses, with the team. So I want to ask you those 2 questions.
Okay. So the way it happened is he didn't say just don't read into this once. He said it like 3 or 4.
I think it was 4. I think it was 4 times is what I heard. Yeah.
He knew that the room, there's a lot of reporters in the back of the gallery all typing away. And he was afraid of, that being the headline. And the question, though, was, if I feel that this doesn't pass muster, he was looking for legal precedent. Could he essentially say it doesn't pass muster currently, but if you do this, it would? So what additional remedies, could I just say there's no overlap between any routes? And if you, eliminate all overlap, then I'll bless the merger. That was the takeaway. The reason you hadn't seen any answers is he was asking for legal cases, and I do believe it was Mr. Robin Hayes, from my memory here, and there was no answer. I didn't hear one from the lawyers, and I didn't hear one from the witness, but he did telegraph that he was thinking, just in case I see some minor issues, do I have the ability of remedying it? And without legal advice and not being a lawyer, I think the answer is yes.
If JetBlue, there are bigger investors than me listening to this. If JetBlue's lawyers are worth their salt in either one of their witnesses they call or in the close, they will point to the many precedents of judges ruling, hey, if you do this, this is pro-competitive. So let me ask you 2 follow-up questions to that. If I remember correctly, you were at the Spectrum Brands trial, weren't you?
So Spectrum Brands, I didn't attend personally, but that one was streamed.
Yeah. Okay. But you guys covered it.
We were all over it. Yeah.
A lot of people have made the precedents for the Spectrum Brands trial. And one of the things the Spectrum Brands trial I remember very well, because I read it in, I believe, one of your emails, the judge asked, hey, if I think this is very similar. She said, hey, if I think this is anti-competitive as is, but I want to rule that if you do this, the merger can go through because then it'd be pro-competitive, could I? And all the parties said, or sorry, not all the parties, but the defendants were instantly like, yes, absolutely. Like, did that give you this vibes?
I mean, there's been nothing in the trial other than that question that has given me this vibe. I expected more of that vibe from the trial because I thought it was going to be more focused on divestitures.
Yep.
And the government, it's the divestitures for the way the trials played out has been different than I expected going into it. And I can expand on that a little later. But per that question was definitely Spectrum Brands like, and that's just one of the many examples. Well, there was a settlement, but it does. I mean, there's many precedents out there, I believe, that show that he can do that.
And now a quick break to remind you that this episode is brought to you exclusively by Alphasense, the AI platform behind the world's biggest investment decisions. Alphasense gives you the tools you need to provide better analysis for you and your clients. As yet another value podcast listener, visit alpha-sense.com/FS today to beat FOMO and move faster than the market. That's alpha-sense.com/FS. I think I asked you before, but to me, this is my theory. I'd be happy to hear otherwise, but the judge is 82 years young, but I believe that this is his first antitrust case, right? And as it's been explained to me, for most judges, unless you're in the DC circuit, you're probably going to get 0 or 1 antitrust cases in your entire career. And I'm wondering if he was honestly wondering, hey, what are my powers in an antitrust case? Because he was unfamiliar with them, despite being a long and storied judge with a great track record and a great reputation. I'm wondering if he was just really interested in that. Do you think there's something to that line of thinking?
I absolutely do. I don't personally know whether he's ever had an antitrust case, but per the questioning and a question like that, it does seem like he's very unfamiliar with it. But the something this judge is very familiar with is he runs a tighter ship than just about any judge I've ever seen. The start time, the stop time, he stops at 1 p.m. He doesn't go to 5 and 5:30 like other judges. One of the reasons we're having a 20-day trial, they're really like 20 half days. It's really like a 10-day trial. He's a very entertaining judge to watch. The gallery loves him. He's very humorous at times. The way he asks his questions is entertaining. Let me just throw out something anecdotal that'll give you a little bit of his personality. Is right before I flew back for the weekend here, he went on for maybe about 10 minutes about Veterans Day, and he said,
oh, I was going to ask about this. Yeah.
He said, Reagan was right. Every generation has to fight to defend their freedom. And, think about that this Veterans Day and, think about who's defending our freedom in this generation, and all the ones past. And you don't get that from every judge. And, he was, I believe, put on the bench by Reagan.
That is correct.
And, he basically, he's a pure Reagan Republican. But that being said, I wouldn't go and, read into it that he's a pure free marketer. What he is he's a judge. He is very into case law. He's not into being an activist. He's not going to be taking his personal thing in there. When he said, I learned to keep my mouth shut with regard to the
objection.
The objection. He said, unless it's gross incompetence
or sexual harassment. I love that line. Yep.
Sexually improper. I learned to keep my mouth shut. So, but it's on, per the rules. It's on your recall list. You can recall him. I'm not going to let you go beyond the scope now. He's very much into how a courtroom should be run.
I'm very glad you mentioned, because all of my background in him said the exact same thing. And I do know that there were several of my ARB friends were ready to shoot fireworks into the sky when, he quoted Ronald Reagan on the way out to Veterans Day. They're like, look, what more do you want when you're going against the DOJ? But I'm with you. I think everything I've heard and seen has said he runs a fair trial. Let me ask you about, did you want to say anything there, or I wanted to ask about Divests?
More than running a free trial, I think he really tries to prevent personal biases affecting his decisions. I think he really tries to be an objective judge without bringing in his personal politics.
Let me ask about divestitures here, because one interesting tidbit that I think has been a little underreported, was I believe it was when they were examining the JetBlue, Robin Hayes, the JetBlue CEO again, but I can't remember for sure. I was surprised because the JetBlue CEO got up there and said, hey, we thought we'd enter this merger agreement and we'd ask the government would ask us about divestitures and we'd have a negotiation, a back and forth. That never happened. We basically had to create our divestiture package based on what we thought would get this over the finish line, what we thought would maintain competition. And I thought that was interesting on a whole host of reasons. Like, it shows the DOJ not even engaging in discussions shows a lot about their intent. They obviously think this is hugely anti-competitive, but we are going to talk about their two market definitions and their theories of the case so far. But again, it reminded me of a little bit of Spectrum Brands, and it goes back to the question the judge asked, where he says, hey, if I want you guys to divest something or I want you to do something, can I order you to do that? And Robin Hayes says, yes, until it's a material adverse event for the combined companies, you could order anything and we'd have to do it. I thought that was very interesting, and I thought it kind of played into each other, if that makes sense.
I'm recalling the specific testimony now.
Yeah.
So there clearly was testimony where they expected back up a little bit. Spirit's board required JetBlue to be proactive.
Yep.
Part of the conditions. And they did it all the way up to a MAC clause of the combined company.
Combined companies, yep.
I've never seen something that broad where it's not just a MAC of Spirit, but it's up to a MAC of the combined company. And they really made JetBlue jump through every regulatory hoop possible. So appearance was all the divestitures was completely proactive. It wasn't within discussions with the government. So I think the judge was a little surprised by this too. Just my own personal opinion in terms of the way his facial expressions and things were on this. And I was surprised. I would have expected that there would have been a little bit more negotiation, and that came across that there was no negotiation, that they proactively looked at the case, thought what could be a problem, proactively did divestitures, and they never seemed to have any discussion or any feedback or what else would you like or any of that from the government. And I think it was a little shocking. And, if we go back to the judge's question of if it doesn't pass muster, what additional things? So far, he's getting no input from the government of what more they would like. The case from the government really seems to be, if it hurts, one person from having this business model impaired, the ULCC, that we just want to stop this merger. And there's nothing that could satisfy us. There's no additional remedies. You're taking out the largest ULCC competitor, and that's just wrong. And that's the government's case.
Let me ask the question. That is so great, because the government has two theories. And this is, I've always been dancing around, but as you said that, and as I've been thinking about it, the government's two cases are, number one, if this is anti-competitive on one route, right? If JetBlue and Spirit have a monopoly flying from Baton Rouge to Des Moines, Iowa, doesn't matter that all across the country, everything's fine. If it's anti-competitive on one route, we can block it under the Clayton Act. That's number one. And the second theory, which I think is very novel and very interesting, and it would speak to why the government did not want to take any divestiture talks here, is Spirit is the largest ULCC in the country. JetBlue wants to buy them and change them from a ULCC model, right? That is anti-competitive, right? That is the argument. And that is an interesting argument to me, because under that scenario, if you and I could, Spirit stock is down 10% every day forever. At this point, if I could put together $100 or $200 and offer to buy Spirit, even though you and I have 0% market share in the airline industry, under the government's case, it would be anti-competitive if we bought Spirit and you and I turned it into our own personal private jet fleet, right? Like, that would be anti-competitive, even though it didn't change any of the market stats. That would be anti-competitive. And obviously, that is a new and novel definition that I feel like the government is testing out, floating, really trying in this trial. So do you agree with me? Am I reading too much into it? Am I thinking about it correctly?
Completely agree with you. I can't think of another antitrust case where we've seen a voluntary business model that Spirit could change tomorrow if it just says our model isn't viable anymore. And yes, we want to be the JetBlue and compete with JetBlue. They could do that tomorrow, and that there's nothing anti-competitive about that. And yet, if JetBlue wants to take them out and do that, the government wants to step up here. It would be probably very imperialistic of antitrust law if it starts going there. I expected to come into here and see a little bit more of, market definitions based on, concentration And but this is the sixth and seventh largest airline merging. And
Yeah.
there's many examples of far more concentrated airlines merging. This is really about the ULCC business model. And and if they get their market definition of a single route, there is a single route out there that is going to be anti-competitive to a certain type of customer. If you're the kind of customer that's going to be doing all the add-ons with Spirit and get up to a JetBlue-like fare, it might not affect you. But if you're the true Spirit customer, which only 33% of their customers was the testimony that went on the straight bottom fare, I would think that there is a route out there that customer would be harmed on. And
Yep.
if they get the definition they want, JetBlue would be in trouble. And so that's why I really think we got to wait till we see where the market definition is going. And my best guess at this point, just from my own common sense, I kind of think you can't go to a route, but you could go to a metro level. I think that's about as small as you could get.
I completely agree. You could go to a metro level, right? And this comes back to the Northeast Alliance. I mean, that was more at the Northeast, but yeah, look, if you were going to have a completely anti-competitive effect at LaGuardia and there are no more slots available at LaGuardia, that's obviously a huge antitrust issue. But to me, I think they're divesting I think the divestitures they reached on their own kind of solve all of the metro level pairs. Let me ask you a few more questions. A big part of this case has been hot docs, right? There are hot docs on both sides. I think most famously when Spirit, the way this case came about was Spirit was trying to merge with Frontier. JetBlue came in over the top. That's why this merger contract is so tight, because they were an interloper. They broke it. And when Spirit was trying to merge with Frontier and JetBlue was coming in over the top, Spirit put out a whole bunch of presentations, press releases, everything that said JetBlue plus Spirit is anti-competitive. And the government, they have a ton of hot docs and they have presented them in court. JetBlue, they called Spirit's chairman up there to talk about it. They tried to explain away why these hot docs weren't quite as hot as you would think they were. So let's talk about the kind of Spirit level hot docs. How do you think those went over in court? How do you think the government pressed them? How do you think JetBlue did a good job of kind of cooling those hot docs off a little bit?
Okay. The first several witnesses were all about hot docs. The first several days of this trial was all about hot docs. It was a seesaw between the direct and cross. The direct is bringing in the hot docs, them saying yes, yes, yes. And if you would go back, 2 years ago, they did a very good job of making those hot docs look like, the way they felt. And then on cross, it was always, well, that's how I believed then. And they all had the explanations of why they believe differently now. Some of it was the difference of the Northeast Alliance disappearing.
Yep.
Some of it was the engine issue on the airplanes with Pratt & Whitney and how we can't expand anymore. A big part of the defense case is how impaired Spirit is at this point. You basically have, we were the most successful. We were growing hand over fist until, 2019. Then we had the pandemic. And then post-pandemic, instead of emerging, we've had, the pilot issues and then the engine issues. And with the engine issues specifically, this is an airline where things aren't getting better post-pandemic. This is an airline where we're not going to hit the apex of the engine issue until 2025. So Spirit presents itself as, we were a successful airline. We are not profitable now, and things are going to be getting worse, and the future is completely uncertain. And that's the way the defense is presenting this case. And the DOJ is trying to make it look like everything's going to be 2019 forever.
There is a failing firm defense, which is, if you don't allow us to make this merger, the other company is going away anyway, right? They're going to liquidate, they're done. This is more a flailing firm defense is what I call it, where, Spirit, it's not like the aircraft go anywhere, but Spirit is saying, hey, our business model is broken. As you said, if this merger doesn't go through, we might have to become JetBlue. We might have to sell off airplanes and become smaller. Like, there's a lot of things, but this business model is broken, both because of post-COVID changes, rising fuel prices, and the GTF issues are really hitting them as well. How do you think the flailing firm defense, as I call it, has been going over with the judge?
I think it's very believable. I would say two things that I could, strongly feel at this point is, and a lot of this came from I guess it was the chief commercial officer for Avelo, Here, he doesn't, have a skin in the game on either side. It came across a very good testimony, unbiased.
Just to clarify, Velo is, if I remember correctly, they're like the fourth or fifth largest ULCC. So this is a much smaller airline. Am I remembering that correctly?
They're less than 1% of the market, and they're the world's newest ULCC.
Yes. Okay, perfect.
Just started, and in 2 years, they have 16 planes. They're expanding crazy. And he had a great confidence of his company's ability to expand in the ULCC space. It was started by, I think, the ex-CFO of United.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Really good management. They started out of Burbank, California. That, and then all the other testimony really shows a very dynamic industry where routes can change one week to the next. The government's case is nobody can do what Spirit can do because Spirit is so successful in it, and they're trying to make it look like there's all these barriers that nobody can fill the void should Spirit be taken out. I don't think that's what the evidence is showing. I think the evidence is showing that it's a very competitive industry. All these baby startup ULCCs are all looking for opportunity. If they could be the new Spirit by filling the Spirit model, I'm not seeing the barriers to do that. And that, I think that was a big part of the government's case. And I don't think that's going well for the government right now.
So again, I believe this was John Kirby, the Spirit revenue management officer, but you could see Spirit stock has dropped like 5 or 10% every day over the past 2 weeks. And I'll ask you about that in a second, but there was a noticeable drop when the revenue manager said, hey, we're forecasting, I think it's something like 12 planes are going to be out of service at the beginning of 2024, 45 planes out of service at the end of 2024, and up to 72 planes out of service at the peak in 2025, I believe is what he said. Right? Something along those lines. You don't have to get the numbers exact, but this is because of the Pratt & Whitney GTF issues. Stock dropped like crazy on that because Spirit has just over 200 planes. Having 75 out of service at the same time is a huge number with incredible air. I want to was this reported correctly? Because I had some people push back and they were like, look, I think Spirit's going to have I think Spirit has about 80 engines that are affected by the GTF issues. For them to have 75 out of service at the same time basically implies all of them are going out of service and never coming back in. And I think the repairs can take up to 300 days. So it didn't make sense to a lot of people. Was that reported correctly? Or do you think that 75 was a cumulative number?
Yeah. So a little bit of correction is Kirby's title is he's vice president in network planning for Spirit.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm sorry about that. It's the JetBlue guy who's the chief revenue officer. Yep.
And he's all focused on, the network. And a big part of his testimony was we compete with our network, which goes to JetBlue's testimony is we want the merger because we can better compete against the legacies with this new expanded network. I am remembering the numbers. So he basically said we have 12 on the ground now.
Yep.
We're going to have 20 by the end of this year. It was the forward was his estimates. And I also heard a lot of people give pushback on these numbers have to be inflated. And, they're just his estimates. And he definitely has an interest in inflating them. So whether his testimony in reality will jive, I'm not sure. But his testimony was 20 by year end. And then the other witnesses were saying it would kind of peak at 40. And it looked like it'd be like 40 by the end of 2024.
Yep.
He was at 45 by the end of 2024. And then he said an apex in 2025 of 72 aircraft. So it looks like, and his testimony is it just keeps getting worse and worse. And he was the one who's most in communication with Pratt & Whitney. So of all the witnesses, he seems to be the guy who would know. And it came across as late breaking news that this issue is getting worse and worse, and it's going to keep getting worse and worse, and we have no idea how bad it is going to be. But the current appearance is it's going to hit an apex of 72 in 2025. And
go ahead.
I was, for JetBlue, a big part of the reason they want the merger, as testified by them, is it's a bulk aircraft purchase. They largely because of the engine issue, taking a delivery of new aircraft is constrained, and they said we can't get them from Airbus until 2029, 2030.
Yep.
And we want to grow, and the best way to expand their network fast is doing this merger. And all the testimony made me believe that JetBlue is genuinely really, really wanting this merger. I'm hearing a lot of, investors thinking, are they looking for a way out? Are they intentionally throwing the game? When I see the CEO of the company out there being a real pitch man, I mean, he came across very salesy on the stand, as most CEOs do. And he was a good witness. They really want this merger. I'm believing they want this merger. I'm with the MAC clause of being of the combined company. I don't think they could get out if they wanted to, and I really don't think they want to. And I don't think they want to renegotiate. I think they just want to get this past regulatory hurdles.
Look, people go look. The trial started October 30th, I believe. The Spirit stock has dropped 5 to 10% basically every day since the trial started, in large part because the Q3 earnings they reported were a disaster. The GTF issues are huge. And every day I get people saying, hey, is the GTF issues, is it a MAC? Is JetBlue going to try to recut? I mean, I'm sure the answer is yes. JetBlue would love to recut if they could, right? You're overpaying for something. Everybody would love to recut. But this is a very tight merger contract. Everything I have seen in the trial suggests to me that no MAC, they're going to go through it if they win, and they're trying their darndest to win. I don't know if you want to add anything there, but that's my gut. Obviously things could change. I'm sure we're taping this on Saturday, what's the date? November 11th. I'm sure Monday, November 13th, they're going to come out and say MAC and we're breaking, just to the gods spiting me. But that's my read of it. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, so happy Veterans Day, because it is November 11th. And it started on October 31st on Halloween. There was a pretrial conference the afternoon on the 30th, but the real trial and the opening statements was Halloween. I definitely feel that JetBlue clearly wants this deal to go through. They're trying their hardest. They feel very confident. They're the CEO on the stand, the people they're bringing. They believe they can get this past regulatory hurdles. The market does not. I mean, when we look at the spread, it's a complete disconnect. It's almost as if the stock's trading as if there's not a merger agreement in play at all.
Well, I think Spirit stock would be around 3 or 4 if there was no merger agreement. So there is some merger premium. But look, the stock, rough numbers, the stock is at 9. If this deal goes through, you'll get about $30 per share. So, even if you assume Spirit was an instant zero the moment this deal breaks, which it's not an instant zero. There's at least equity optionality value there. You're talking about a 27%, if I'm doing that math in my head, chance of this deal going through. And that's assuming pretty draconian stuff. Like, it doesn't seem like any of that to me, but that's where the market is. I think there's, a lot of people are thinking, hey, maybe there's a recut. I don't see a path for a recut, but that would impact the math. But yeah, you're right. Let me ask you a few more questions. Go ahead. Any comments you have there?
Back on that, I absolutely agree. I'm seeing in the court more of a 50-50, and I'm seeing the market pricing in a less of that. And I think your calculation of the odds is probably pretty accurate about the markets thinking, maybe 25, 27% probability going through. And it seems to me that because it's factoring in so little probability of it happening, what we're seeing moving the stock is not what's going on in courtroom, because quite frankly, we haven't seen that much really dramatic testimony that should move the stock yet from the courtroom. What we're seeing is it's trading on fundamentals. I mean, if it was really priced on the merger, the near-term revenue doesn't matter. The plane issue doesn't matter. We saw it go down really hard following Kirby's testimony. Well,
it went down really hard because I agree with you. It's a little bit the fundamentals, but Kirby's testimony, that 70 number was so big. I think people started to price in at some point. When does this start creeping closer and closer to Spirit itself has suffered an MAE versus kind of industry? I don't think we're close to that, to be honest, but obviously the results have been so bad. The bird numbers they're talking about have been so bad, and the planes ground have been so bad. I do think people are starting to talk about, hey, when does JetBlue just have to claim an MAE? Again, I think this is scared arbs. I just not seeing it, but I think that's what's happening.
And I disagree slightly. I think that more we're seeing the stock trading on fundamentals and less on, the percentage arb situation.
Well, you know what? Actually, you and I are both right, because if the stock's trading on fundamentals, the fundamentals are indicating closing in on an MAE. So I say that a little facetiously. Don't put that into the record, JetBlue on a MAC, but yeah. Let me ask another. So we talked about this. Actually, before we go to this hot docs, I do want to ask one more thing about the head of network. The head of network indicated, they asked about, hey, you had this initial 2027 plan. You were going to go to all these new airports. And he said, based on the GTF issues, those are out the window. We're probably not, I think he basically said we're not going to enter any new airports. That's fine, whatever. I don't think that has bearing for the Flailing Firm defense, but I don't think that has huge bearing for the trial because it's not anti-competitive. You buy them and preclude them for the future, probably. The interesting thing to me was he talked about, hey, we're exiting the Denver airport. And he talked about a few other airports that they're exiting. And I thought that was interesting because one of JetBlue's defense is, hey, the government can point to, I think it was 60 routes that they say are anti-competitive, right? The old Baton Rouge to Des Moines route where only JetBlue and Spirit fly. And one of JetBlue's defenses to that was, and I'm using rough numbers, it was like, hey, in 19 of those routes, one of us or the other have already left those routes, right? The airline industry is very fluid. Routes are changing all the time. Airplanes famously move. They can fly different routes pretty quickly. And I thought it was interesting when he said, hey, we're pulling back from markets, because doesn't that kind of speak to a fluid industry? Did you read anything as that? Did you think JetBlue scored any points there? Did the judge pick up on that at all?
So with regard to Kirby's testimony, everybody's testimony has been a fluid industry. He was just additive. But I think what was probably more important with Kirby's testimony is here's the guy who's got the network plan. He's the one who did the 5-year plan. He introduced 5-year plans to the company. And he has, the 5-year plan that we're currently in and the next one. And his testimony, even on direct, is he said that that's what we believed in May of this year when the board approved it. And with the engine issue since then and how it's been, and that's almost how he introduced the engine issue as going up to 72 planes. I no longer believe that. So here he's got his own 5-year plan. May's not that long ago. No. And just since May, I no longer believe that, that plan is viable. And then the future plan beyond that is a complete redo. And he was very, very believable witness. He was, but for the one comment that he interjected of, no longer believing it since May, he was a really good witness for the DOJ until the cross. Yep. And in the cross, he became an amazingly good witness for the defendants. But the overall appearance is he was not trying to, spin or be biased. He came across credible.
Let me go back to hot docs. So we already talked about the hot docs on the Spirit side, but there are hot docs on the government side, right? The government, and people can go listen to the Lionel Hutz podcast, but the government sued. JetBlue had an alliance, the Northeast Alliance. The government sued and ultimately won. And a big piece of the government case, and there were lots of pieces. This was not the only pieces, but like page 3 of the case talked about the JetBlue effect has saved Americans billions of dollars since JetBlue. When JetBlue enters markets, they are the ones who really lower prices. They're the only ones who compete with the legacy carriers, all this. Like they were really hammering home the JetBlue effect and in the Northeast Alliance. And now they're suing JetBlue for trying to get bigger. And one of JetBlue's defenses has been like, government, we're doing exactly what you guys want us to do in the Northeast. We're getting bigger. We're bringing the JetBlue effect to millions more of Americans. So we talked about the Spirit hot docs. I want to ask about those government-sided hot docs. Have those been scoring any points so far?
They've been less in number, but they've been very impactful. And, we actually had PowerPoint presentations by the government, highlighting the JetBlue effect from the Northeast Alliance case. And then that's, being presented and the witnesses are being questioned on it. The best evidence of the power of the JetBlue effect has actually been from the government.
Yeah, I just, that was one of the reasons, that's one of the things I've really liked about this. Northeast Alliance, I wanted to mention that. At one point, I can't remember whose testimony it was, but the Northeast Alliance came up and the judge interjected and he said, I read that decision. And that was interesting to me because I read that decision as well. I'm not surprised. This is a thorough judge. It's a well-respected judge. I'm not surprised he would go read the most recent precedent in the airline industry for mergers that happened in the district that he is in. Not surprised at all. But, if you read that opinion, a lot of it, multiple times, the judge says JetBlue presented in a expert witness who was not credible. A direct quote was, they're not credible, or what they're presenting does not pass. I think it was the rational test or the smell test, logic test, or something like that. So when he said that, I don't think he gave anything off. But, if I was sitting in the defendant's chair and the judge said, yeah, I read that case, and that case had a lot of things talking about how I'm not credible and it went against me, I would be sweating a little bit. Did you read anything into that?
Well, first off, I have not, I'm embarrassed to say, I haven't read the decision yet. It's on my reading list. But the judge clearly came in, indicated that he read it. There wasn't a lot of read from it because it was really just a one-off comment. So it's up to, we know that everything that's in the decision is something that's, for him top of mind. I don't think there's really a read through into it beyond that.
Perfect. Let's see. I'm just looking at my questions. We've hit most of my questions. Last thing, a big argument here is going to be market definition, as we've mentioned. Do you define the market as every city pair, right? Des Moines to Baton Rouge, New York to Fort Lauderdale. Do you define it every city pair? Do you define it the metro area? Do you define it nationally, right? Those are the possible. I think JetBlue, if you define it nationally, JetBlue clearly wins, right? JetBlue plus Spirit would have middling market share compared to the big four. If you define it metro with the divestitures, JetBlue and Spirit probably win. If you define it city pair, maybe you could divest away. Maybe you believe the fluid defense, but the government's got a real shot there. Do you have any indication for, obviously it's early, there's lots to go. Based on your read of the thing so far, what do you think is the most likely market definition here? Or it's probably too early, but just tell me which way you would be leaning.
Yeah, without seeing, the experts coming in with theirs, my thinking just from a common sense of me as a traveler, I kind of think metro level. I live in, I'm 30 miles east of Sacramento. Sacramento is my main airport. But if the prices are too high in Sacramento, I'll go to the Bay Area.
Yep.
So all those airports in the Bay are in my substitution range. I won't drive to LA to fly to Boston, but I will drive to San Francisco.
Yep.
So I think if it goes by, where the substitutability range is, people in Philadelphia will fly out of Wilmington. People out of Fort Lauderdale will go to Miami. I think the metro area makes a little sense. I think that specific route pairs to me make no sense because how dynamic they are, and that it's to me just not the right definition of the market with consumer behavior. Yep. If we get to the metro level, I do think we'd have to still probably have a little bit more divestiture still. I think.
What do you think needs to be divested?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but there clearly were some metro markets that seem to potentially be an issue beyond that. They divested in the most egregious ones already. But I could see a kind of order, wanting a couple adjustments in different metro areas if that became the market definition.
I wonder if the judge would order a couple of plane divestitures as well, just because I do remember there was some discussion of the judge. I believe one of his questions was, hey, doesn't matter if you give these slots away. They're, again, JetBlue selling Spirit slots in LaGuardia to another airline so that they can land in LaGuardia and compete. And he asked, hey, does it matter if you give these away, if they don't have the planes to fly them, or, if they have to pull planes from other markets? So yes, it creates competition in LaGuardia, but it might take competition away from somewhere else. And again, my argument would be, I think this is a very fluid market. I think aside from a few very constricted airports, which are few and far between, I think this is probably pro-competitive, but I do wonder if the judge says, hey, okay, divest the markets you've agreed to. Maybe Mike's right. Maybe one or two more airports, maybe Austin, maybe a few others got mentioned. Maybe you need to divest some slots there. And maybe toss in 5 planes to Allegiant and 3 planes to Sun County while you're at it, which, again, it has to be he can order divestiture up to a MAC for the combined company, and JetBlue has to take it. I wonder if divesting planes is kind of on the radar there.
I don't think that would be in the remedy. There was clearly a question of that. Can they expand realistically if they don't have planes and pilots? The pilot issue seems to be abating. The plane issue seems to be increasing. But if we go back to the commercial officer of Avelo, here's somebody who's rapidly wanting to expand. They're having no problem getting planes because they're going after older aircrafts. They're out there, and there's leases that are out there. The only thing that's impaired is if you want brand new, A320s from Airbus. That's what's impaired. And there's many ways to serve an air, in the ULCC model, there's many ways to serve it beyond that. And here, the newest startup is not going after new aircraft directly from Airbus. I don't think you'd need to divest aircraft.
Okay, no, that's great. I was spitballing. I could see it, but again, I was mainly just spitballing. Anything else? I've got two last questions I want to wrap up with, but anything else that you're picking up on, you think I should have been asking that kind of caused the hairs on the back of your neck to stand up?
To me, the main, kind of surprising takeaways is how focused the government is on a business model that essentially is a choice. and that their case is really, they think nobody can do the ULCC business model like Spirit. And they think if you take out Spirit, that nobody's going to fill this business model. My other takeaway is the testimony has been very strong on the fluidity of this industry. I think that the barriers to filling the void, and Judge Young asked the question, wouldn't they just fill the void created by the vacuum of Spirit? And the evidence seems to be yes. I see a dynamic industry. I don't see that only Spirit can do this. Spirit has some unique things. They have the lowest cost in the industry, and they've done that. But
well, they're also losing $1 billion a year. When you're willing to lose $1 billion a year, I say that facetiously because they were profitable before COVID. But yeah.
But the reason the other ULCCs have had a different model is they're trying to avoid head-to-head competition in markets. If they go into it, they're going to adopt the same kind of stance that Spirit did. There's no barriers to anybody reinventing the Spirit method, and then they would be the ones with the Spirit effect.
So this actually blends nicely to my last question. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but if I ask you, hey, we're halfway in, your service is providing emails to investors. And again, I can't recommend it highly enough. You can include this in a quote if you want. It's some of the best research dollars that we spend, just on the podcast. Liquidia and Burford have been two things that I've presented on the podcast, and you guys have been all over those two. There's a lot of other ones. You can use that a quote. Anybody, I'll have you give your contact information then. But what you do is you provide investors insights into what's going on in the trial. If I ask you right now, as we sit here almost halfway through the trial, what do you think the odds are of DOJ winning, JetBlue winning? What would you assign?
I would be a coin flip. And throughout the trial, I've been leaning this way, then I've been leaning that way, and I've literally been seesawing back and forth. I think it's too early to call. And my best subjective odds at this point is about a 50-50. And when I'm looking at the price, it's not a 50-50, right? The market is thinking it's more like a 25%.
So let me push you on 2 points there. First, it's too early to call 50-50. Is that good for JetBlue? Because again, the way this trial works is the government presents their case first. And then, after I think it's 14 days, JetBlue will go present their case. We're in the government's presentation of the case. If you're saying it's 50-50 while the government's presenting their case, isn't JetBlue going to come up there? And obviously we've got expert witnesses. We've got a lot to go, but isn't JetBlue going to come up there and present their case and they'll be, oh my God, like, the government could only break even when they were presenting, JetBlue presented and it's over. Like, is that a fair comparison, or are you kind of building that into your odds?
Well, I'm building that into my odds. And as we mentioned before, we have seen a lot of the direct case.
Yes.
Blue with the previous witnesses. It was just in their cross-examination that was beyond the scope. I got a pretty good feel at this point of what JetBlue's direct is going to be. I'm not expecting a bunch of surprises when I, finally see their case and their testimony. I think that the trouble in handicapping it now is we haven't seen the experts. And I think that the judge is really going to have to rely on, what remedies he can do, what remedies he'd need to do, where the market definition should be. There's a fair amount, we're only 8 days in of 20. There's a lot still to come.
And now a quick break to remind you that this episode is brought to you exclusively by Alphasense, the AI platform behind the world's biggest investment decisions. Alphasense gives you the tools you need to provide better analysis for you and your clients. As yet another value podcast listener, visit alpha-sense.com/FS today to beat FOMO and move faster than the market. That's alpha-sense.com/FS. let me ask my closing case. I don't disagree with anything you just said, right? We've got a lot more to come. The expert witnesses are probably going to be the key. But one of the things you said in the answer previous was, hey, I think that it's been pretty well established that this is a fluid industry, right? You mentioned the judge asking, why doesn't the void get filled? And I think once you start saying fluid industry, and we can divest at the metro level to make sure that all these anti-competitive gates get divested, right? That to me screams, hey, nationwide market share is going to be way below each of the big four. We're divesting the competitive gates, and we've got a fluid industry. You've got a novel DOJ case against a ULCC business model. Like, all of that to me says JetBlue should be favored, right? So when I throw all of that out at you, and again, you do this all the time. What are you seeing that I didn't lay out there that makes you think this is a coin flip, not favored for JetBlue?
It came out more in the opening statements, and the opening statements is, the market definition is a route. There is a customer out there, and there's been no testimony to date that refutes that there is a customer that will be hurt by this.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go as far to say that's been an admission by JetBlue that there is a customer that will be hurt by this. It's just not many people, and it's not in many markets. And so if Section 7 of the Clayton Act is looking at a totality, then that's good for JetBlue. If it's significant enough that the definition is a significant area or significance of a competitive area comes down to a route and a specific customer, there's a customer that seems to be harmed.
Go ahead.
I'd like to add to that. JetBlue's testimony is, we did these divestitures proactive. That wasn't even based on input. We're totally willing to do more. Tell us what to do. We'll do anything. We want to be cooperative. We did all that proactive. They're making a good situation where if there's something that can be remedied, it will be remedied. If the judge believes that there's a customer that's going to be harmed, for me, the testimony is that customer is only going to be reasonably harmed for about a 2-year period, because there will be somebody coming in that then offers that service back to him if that service, would ultimately be profitable. So should that be enough harm that he's only temporarily harmed?
I'm just laughing because, again, the scope of the merger agreement says JetBlue has to divest or do anything up to an MA for the combined firms. And you said, hey, there is probably a consumer harmed. It's just there aren't a lot of them, and they're in very small markets. And I'm imagining some of the most creative remedies could be the judge saying, look, JetBlue, this is good, but you guys need to fly. I'll use my Des Moines to Baton Rouge example. You guys need to offer private jet service from Des Moines to Baton Rouge, every Tuesday and Thursday, so that these specific consumers aren't harmed. Like, you could imagine some, obviously that's crazy. I'm laughing, but that is a very creative remedy that would be well within the scope that could solve this. The other thing I was laughing at is use the term significantly. And I had a very smart friend who I'm sure is going to listen to this. And one of the questions he lobbed in that I had on here that I was going to ask is, hey, look, the DOJ has the burden of proof. They need to win on market. They certainly need to win on market, probably because I just don't think the foreclosing on ULCC business model is going to fly. I could be wrong. It's just a bridge too far. It would really open up a lot of Pandora's box for antitrust going forward that might get overturned on appeal. We could talk about appeal. I don't think we need to, but one of my friends said, hey, even if the DOJ merges, the burden is on them and they need to prove that competition is significantly harmed, right? I believe the Clayton Act specifically says significantly, and it's just hard to see how you get to significantly here, and use that term too. Do you think you can get to that significantly bridge, or am I kind of reading too much into that? Is that a fast and loose interpretation?
I think you're right that the word is significant, and I think that comes down to the market definition, because if you're that one consumer, it's significant. And that is what's going to be defined by the court in terms of it's really based on the market, whether you get to the level of significance. If you're at a national market, that individual consumer versus all the other ones that would be a benefit, it's insignificant. If it's down to a specific route, that's 33% of the people flying Spirit. That would be significant.
Well, Mike, you have been too generous with your time. I'll give you a quote. Everyone, if you are an institutional investor doing event driven, a lot of it does fall into the patent stuff, but the patent stuff can be very interesting. Liquidia is one. Again, I believe that I did a podcast with Lionel Hutz on that one as well. I can't remember for sure, but that's when you guys have been all over. Burford, Argentina, YPF. You guys have been great unearthing that. If you're interested in Spirit JetBlue having a man in the courthouse, how can people reach you, Mike, if they're interested in that?
Well, you can go to our website, which is mdcfinancial.com. And you can also email me directly. It's Mike at mdcfinancial.com. And our service is typically for institutional people. We're not looking specifically for retail clients. We actually believe what we do, which is event-driven legal, and we call it the event-driven legal service, it's probably really not suitable for typical retail investors. The best way there's a lot of catalysts that happen from legal. I've been doing this. We started the event-driven legal service in February of 2009. There's a lot of catalysts that come from legal events, but what you want to be is you want to be the smart money. You want to be the smartest, person on every situation. And that, entails reading the documents, attending the court, knowing exactly what's going on in the space.
Sotera, you guys are great on the Sotera trial now that what I love is I think I subscribe. Again, this is something we really cut back on a lot of our research services. This is some of the best money we did. When you and I were first talking, I remember because I was walking my dog and I was like, hey, I don't know, I'm trying to cut back on the institutional. And you're like, look, we charge, and I'm not going to say rates or anything, but we charge, but it is cancelable like on the day, right? You tell us we're not providing the value, like every day we're trying to provide the value. We're not providing the value. Boom. There are no strings attached, nothing. Do it. Again, I think everybody who's listening to this is probably interested in Spirit JetBlue. If you're an institutional investor and listening to it, you probably do need to be hitting Mike up and getting the daily recaps because they've been great. Mike, this has been great. Maybe we'll do a follow-up kind of once the trial is settled to follow up on this, but this has been great. Thanks again for coming on. We'll include a link to how to contact Mike in the show notes if anybody has any questions or wants to follow up there, and we'll go from there. Mike, have a good Veterans Day.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate all the kind words.
A quick disclaimer. Nothing on this podcast should be considered investment advice. Guests or the hosts may have positions in any of the stocks mentioned during this podcast. Please do your own work and consult a financial advisor. Thanks.